So I'll get right into it, mostly because we probably don't have a whole lot of people following as of right now. But if you're tuning in, this is Sonic Boom Live. I'm Justin, your host. Usually I have Eric with me, but Eric is out this week in favor of enjoying his skiing time with his family. So I get to host it solo. Usually do a pretty big game industry related topic, but this week it's been kind of a slow news cycle. The biggest news is Sony buying Bungie. But we've covered sort of the implications of buyouts at length when we talked about Microsoft buying Activision. Sort of the same quandaries and issues that we have with like the whole idea of consolidating the industry we've talked about there. But there is some interesting details to talk about. I will be going over that and the rest of kind of like the topics of the day. There's some interesting things about NFTs and how many companies are backpedaling on that after significant fan backlash. Some of it's deserved, some is not. Again, we've talked about this before, but I'll be going over the benefits of NFTs if there really are any. But otherwise, I'll be talking about why there's such backlash because there's good reason for it. Some of the other things, we have some updates from WB Games. They provided us a kind of update on their slate of games that were supposed to be released this year. Some delays, mostly some confirmation that we will be getting at least two of the highly awaited games. There's some other tidbits here, like we got Sony's State of Play yesterday for Gran Turismo 7. There's not much to talk about there, but some of the things I can point out from what I saw in the video at least. What else do we got? We have Microsoft kind of elaborating more on what they intend to do with Call of Duty. Both on the side of whether or not they're going to be honoring the existing contracts with Sony, which they kind of have to do unless they want to renegotiate them. But additionally, how much they want to release. There is a wealth of talent at Activision, and all of the studios have basically been put on support for Call of Duty. So it would be nice to see some diversification of the titles coming out of Activision, and I'm sure Microsoft is more than happy to, or basically Xbox Game Studios is more than happy to explore their back catalog. On a related note, FTC had some statements about the Microsoft Activision purchase, which we will talk about as well. And then to round it all out, Sony gave Q3 results, fiscal results for the company as a whole, but we also got some details on the games division, the PlayStation Studio side of things. We get to find out how much they pulled in and actually what's the big money makers for them. There's some interest there because the earnings report kind of tells us where the biggest money drivers are for the PlayStation brand, and that kind of gives us some insight into what Sony might be prioritizing as the key areas of performance that they want to focus on. So all of that today and more. We usually broadcast at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, give or take 10 minutes because sometimes we get technical issues. But otherwise, you get the stream at that point in time. We stream both to Twitch and YouTube live. So if you want to turn into any of those or switch from your preferred platform, it's basically youtube.tv/SonicBloomTV. youtube.com/SonicBloomTV or twitch.tv/SonicBloomTV. You'll find us on either one. So let's just get into it since we do not have our co-host today. All right. So the first major piece of information, I guess, that we got, we finally got another, major studio giving us a peek into the games that they're planning on to release. Sony did their State of Play for Gran Turismo 7. They've kind of gotten into this habit of a month or so before release of a game. They do this big gameplay reveal where they actually go over the big details and what you can expect from the game. They did it with Horizon Zero Dawn, or not Zero Dawn, but Horizon Forbidden West. 6 months about that before the release of that game. Gran Turismo's State of Play is happening just a couple of weeks or like a month before the actual planned release of Gran Turismo 7. But we got some interesting details, and mainly it seems that it's a return to form for them. If you enjoyed Gran Turismo 1, 2, or 3, both 1 and 2 were on the PlayStation, and 3 was on the PlayStation 2. Each one of those games sort of expanded out what the core game was. They had the license tests, you had the main races and like different cups that you could participate in, shops to buy your car, shops to modify your cars, and a pretty wide stable of vehicles that you could use. The biggest issue with everything post the PlayStation 2 era of Gran Turismo games is that they start shrinking their car library and making it more attached to DLC and progressive updates. Tracks were also released that way, and I think it kind of rubbed people the wrong way. So this one, they announced, I think, over 300 cars, over 400 cars in total. That's before they start adding DLC. And then I think there was 200 cars that you could purchase straight up from their like the car dealerships. Also, we see a return of all of the like legacy tracks plus some new ones, which is really cool. So the base package for Gran Turismo 7 is a whole lot of what we would hope to get from the Gran Turismo franchise, plus some new modes. They showed off this kind of neat music mode, which is kind of cool to us because we like game audio. Sonic Boom itself is a game audio tech company, so it was kind of neat to see that they had a system where you could play back both the replays and the game itself, where you'd have UI that would pulse along to the music on beat, and then in the replay mode you see cuts that were strategically cut around basically like measure changes on the song. So that was kind of neat to see. But otherwise it's like standard fare. Graphics look sharp. It is a cross-generation game, unfortunately, so it's going to be appearing on PS4 and PS5. I do believe there's some compromises because I feel like the base game itself was built for PS4, and then the additional functions of like higher frame rates, high resolutions, and ray tracing were all added. Not necessarily a second thought, but to get some of the cutting edge graphics. But I think the core issue there is that if you watch the video replay, stuff like the ray tracing updates particularly slow. It seems that there are some compromises in performance that I'm not sure if we would have seen if it was a PS5 only game, but we'll have to wait and see. I feel like a lot of the cross-generational games build for PS4 and then scale up specifically in resolution and frame rate to make a game feel like it's next generation, but are you really getting the most if you're doing like a dynamic 4K at 60 frames per second versus a really beautiful game that maxes out at 30 frames per second? That's sort of what I'd want to see. I guess in a game like Gran Turismo, having 60 frames per second is kind of important, so maybe this is not much of a loss there. But games like Horizon Forbidden West, the scaling to make it seem next gen, I think, is not the most impressive use of the new hardware, and I'd like to start seeing games transition away from that space. But I don't know if there's much more to go over on Gran Turismo, if there's any more features or gameplay modes that are worth discussing. But if you want to check it out, Sony had the live stream yesterday. I'm fairly sure you can watch the whole thing in full 4K video if you'd like to get a good idea of what the March release of Gran Turismo will look like. Either way, if you're a Gran Turismo fan, I'm sure it won't disappoint. Next bit of news. Elden Ring has gone gold. I think it went gold last week, but it's a long-awaited game by the creator of Sekiro and the Souls games. So if you're a fan of those, you're just a fan of like the roguelike-esque games that they create, Elden Rings is kind of like a more even more open world foray into that. I think Sekiro was kind of a step towards that, and now they're really going for like this big open world. You have like animals that you can ride and to traverse like huge amounts of landscape or terrain, I guess. So it looks pretty awesome. It was supposedly co-written by now blanking on his name, the writer of Game of Thrones, and I would remember his name, but I can't keep thinking Tolkien, and it's not right. But either way, he supposedly wrote it. I don't think he was that integral to it, but he probably created the base lore around it that the game developers expanded upon. Either way, it's a medieval game, looks neat, but it's a Souls-like game. So if you're not into that sort of thing, you might not be that interested. But it is interesting to see the team sort of advance the concept of their Souls base gameplay and expand it out and expand what the technology can do. So looking forward to at least watching people play through it. Next set of news. Oh, and I will say too with Elden Ring, since it's gone gold, it's probably not far off from release at this point. Usually you go gold after you get approval by PlayStation and Xbox, so that passes their certification requirements. And once it does that, you can kind of lock down the build and say it's gold. There still will be patches afterwards, but it's basically an approved, stamped build that both Sony and Microsoft were okay with, and it'll be published to their consoles with probably day one patch as per usual with most modern games. So expect the game soon. Next bit of news. Microsoft has talked more about their Activision purchase and specific what they want to do with the Call of Duty franchise. It's a big wonder. Doesn't seem much of a mystery, but basically how Microsoft and the Xbox studios will handle the Call of Duty franchise on other consoles. So if you weren't aware, Call of Duty has appeared on just about every modern game platform that's available. So PlayStation 4 has had every Call of Duty. Sony did strike some sort of exclusivity deal with Call of Duty within the PS4 generation where they got content early or exclusive content. But the game was on both platforms, no problem. With Microsoft and the Xbox studios making a purchase of Activision in full, that means they have full licensing rights behind the Call of Duty franchise. What they did say is they will honor the existing agreements between Sony and Activision, which they have to do unless they're willing to renegotiate contracts. But that means going into they basically have to get into negotiations with Sony about what they want to do with Call of Duty. And my guess is Microsoft doesn't want to do that, so they'll just honor what's there. And that means likely it's the next 3 Call of Duty games because the way Activision had been doing it was they were releasing games every year with 3 studios being the lead developer on a title each. So you could have one game go into development, have about a 3 to 4 year lifespan on it, and release 3 years from there. And then you'd have another studio follow up, and they'd be on a 3-year release cycle, and that would be the one after, and so on and so forth. So it allowed each studio to have about 3 years to develop a Call of Duty game, but kind of at breakneck pace. In all reality, there's probably 3 titles in development. Sony probably has agreements in some way with Activision for the next 3 Call of Duty titles. And Microsoft will likely be honoring that, plus World at War, which is their large multiplayer game that's sort of persistent. My guess here is that Microsoft's approach, and this is something we've discussed before, is that at a minimum, they want the Call of Duty. They bought Activision and the sort of breadth of the IPs so that they have more content to fill out their Game Pass service. Their number one goal right now is Xbox is Game Pass service more than anything else at this point, and it's important for them to have a large set of IP and games that they can release to the platform. Secondary to that is which consoles they release on. So if a Call of Duty has always made it onto Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation, I don't know if Sony or if Microsoft will be keen to pull from those platforms because really the point is Game Pass more than anything else. I think Microsoft knows that they're not going to be able to convert all gamers to Game Pass. And to make something exclusive to Game Pass and Xbox may not be their best approach. They may do it in the short term because it is expedient for them to try to get people over to Game Pass and thinking about Game Pass as soon as possible. And if you allow the game to release on PlayStation, you might not have the same sort of mind space of people going, well, I've got my PlayStation 5 and I don't really care to get Game Pass at this point in time. But I think in the short term, that's this kind of strategy. In the long term, they may not care too much about releasing physical copies only on PlayStation in the future. But we'll see. We'll see what it actually means. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting about the statements that they have made, Microsoft that is that they are interested in reeling back the pace in which Call of Duty games are being released, which is, as I said, once per year, with 3 of their core studios participating in releasing a new game every year. If they dial it back, it allows Activision Studios to focus more time on a single Call of Duty to make it the best Call of Duty. Additionally, there's a whole back catalog of Activision titles, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon. There's some weird ones from the back catalog that I think maybe newer gamers might not be familiar with, but a lot of the older gamers may be happy with, not least of which is Tony Hawk. So it wouldn't surprise me that pulling some of the developers off of Call of Duty and have it maybe releasing every 2 years or 3 years would then allow them to focus more time on one, make that the best thing, and have maybe more persistent game that exists for like 3 years of a single Call of Duty, as well as allowing the studios to kind of free up and work on new IP or old IP in a new modern form. So it's good to hear that. It's good to hear that Phil Spencer's kind of taking that approach with the Call of Duty franchise. It's probably a welcome change, and I think gamers, even like looking at the way Call of Duty games have sold in the past 2 releases, there's a noticeable downward trend. And if like Guitar Hero is any game to judge by, releasing them too frequently, too often can sometimes burn out the gamer population and kind of drop the interest in it. So that's Call of Duty. Let's talk about WB Games. So WB Games last year and late summer, they had this big WB extravaganza where they showed off trailers for the new Batman movie, sort of the ongoing plans for the Flash movie, but also within that sort of wider announcement, they did focus a lot on WB Games and their Harry Potter games, the Gotham Knights, the Batman games, and Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, as well as like Mortal Kombat and Injustice, which we don't have real confirmation of, although Mortal Kombat, I think 12, has been spotted, so it's very well in development, very likely in development, but we're just waiting for some sort of official announcement of Mortal Kombat 12. But we did get a statement from WB's president talking about the next set of releases. The bit of bad news is Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has been delayed to 2023. A little bit surprising because the gameplay trailer that they showed made it appear that it was very close to being released, but my guess is we saw probably a functional vertical slice, probably around an early beta build. So they've got another year of spit and polish to get Kill the Justice League up to a level of quality that I think an Action Tiles kind of is going to be expected. So that gets pushed to 2023. I don't think it had a real release date anyway, so it's not a huge surprise. I think the what would be surprising is if Gotham Knights got pushed, but it was confirmed that it will be coming out in 2022. In all likelihood, that is well beyond beta. It's probably going through final cleanup and might go into cert. I would hypothesize around summer, so it may be a fall release game. But it'll be a welcome return of the Gotham series. It's kind of like a weird spiritual successor to Gotham City and those, but from what reports are is that they don't actually exist in the same timeline. So it's just probably best to say that it's the Gotham City that we enjoyed from the Gotham City games, but in this case, no Batman. It takes place in like a post-Batman world where the Bat family, which is Batgirl, Robin, blanking on the other character's name, but you get like the old Robin, the new Robin, Red Hood, those characters all returning as part of the Bat family to defend Gotham in absence of Batman. It looks pretty fun. It looks like it could be really interesting, if not just like a good sandbox game to romp around in, because we know that the battle systems are really solid. So yeah, look forward to that. That's in 2022, probably fall. We're also expecting the Harry Potter game in 2022 still. That one's a little strange because the only thing that's been released about that game has been a trailer that is not gameplay at all. So we haven't seen gameplay of it, but they are saying it's coming out in 2022. It's supposed to be a next-gen game. We'll see. It's kind of hard to say because I don't think anybody knows what it looks like. But they could also do the surprise thing where they just show off like a nearly complete game and expect like a maybe late winter, or not late winter, but a late fall, early winter release of the Harry Potter game in time for Christmas. One of the bigger pieces of news this week was Sony buying Bungie. This is a big deal. It seems like it's kind of a response to last week's news of Microsoft and the Xbox Studios division purchasing Activision. Like again, I said last week, we talked about it, I think 2 weeks ago, when the week that it happened. So if you want to check out all of our comments on that, just go back 2 videos and you can find out what we said. Sony and the PlayStation Studio brand under Herman Hulst has made it, or they tried to make it clear that this is not a response to Activision. It's more of a long-term deal that they're working on. I don't doubt that that's untrue. There's no way that they could have put together in 2 weeks a purchase for Bungie. What it looks like is it's kind of a novel contract and buyout of Bungie that is different than what we've seen before. In most cases, Sony buys the publisher or the development studio, like they did with, say, Insomniac, and they take in the studio as an internal team, and they make the titles that Sony's most interested in. Bungie, who's had a history of buyouts before, looks to be taking a different approach. I'll remind everybody that I can't remember the exact year. I'd say maybe it's like 2008, maybe. Microsoft purchased Bungie in specific to get a hold of the Halo franchise and the Halo IP for 2 games, or actually 3 games technically, under Microsoft's ownership. Bungie produced Halo games, so it was Halo 3, Halo Reach, and the one in between, which was kind of like focused more on other Spartans and not specifically Master Chief. They're great games, actually. They kind of explored a more narrative edge to Bungie's storytelling, which I think kind of was lacking in the other Halo games. But we got to see a new side of Bungie, but they weren't really content with their buyout, or really just working under Microsoft Game Studios. So somewhere towards the end of the Xbox 360's life, Bungie split from Microsoft. They got to retain their talent, but they lost the IPs of Halo. So Halo went to Microsoft, and on the same deal, they had to produce games until Halo 4. So Halo 4 Reach and the other game that I keep blanking on. All their games, Bungie went on their own, they started working on uh, uh, Destiny as like their big title, and it has worked out well for them. They grew the studio to 900 employees, and Destiny has been very successful for them. So much so that Sony bought them out for 3.6 billion. But under this agreement that they have, it's novel in the sense that Bungie gets to retain its independent studio status. And specifically in the press release Sony had concerning the purchase of Bungie, they made sure to state it was an independent multi-platform studio and publisher, which makes it sound like Destiny's not going to be changing anytime soon. That game will remain being a cross-platform game. There's not really good reason for Sony to kind of disrupt that. Again, Sony does plan on making their own streaming service. We talked about Spartan again a couple videos ago, but Project Spartan is supposedly their response to Microsoft's Game Pass. So them buying IP would give them access to maybe make their Spartan service a way to get like Destiny multiplayer for free, whereas Microsoft may still have to, or if you're on an Xbox platform, you may have to still pay for it. Things like that that they can still leverage with the IP more so than anything else. I think Bungie has a lot of talent in the space of massive multiplayer games. This is something that Sony studios lack. They've mostly focused on single player story-driven experiences and have not done first-person shooters or multiplayer shooters or anything of that nature. And since like the PS3 era, really, so them pulling on Bungie gives them access to not just the IPs, but a wealth of talent and technology that will help them develop their maybe a next killer app that's not necessarily developed under Bungie, but is using a lot of Bungie's tech to be the foundation of that game. Likewise, they could very well have Bungie working on a PlayStation exclusive title at some point. But I would just guess that it's less about that and more about IP and talent acquisition that's going to be really important for them so that they can take the tech and move it over to different games. So much so that of the $3.6 billion buyout price for Bungie, over $1 billion is earmarked to retain talent. So if that doesn't make that much sense to you, what it basically is, and what's basically been reported as, is golden handcuffs. And in investment and acquisition terms, basically golden handcuffs are a way to hitch the developer talent that you may be purchasing to a company for a longer period of time. What's interesting about this is that it's so Sony can retain like well over 100 different employees through incentivizations for them to stay on for a long period of time. This, you usually don't see it on this scale. You usually see it on the like sort of upper management and the sort of talent that you want. You don't see it sort of with a broader application to a more like larger set of employees. And I think this is important to point out because it says something about the strategy behind Sony buying Bungie. If it was a straight IP acquisition thing, they could do without the rest of the talent, and they could just go, well, now we have our own multiplayer game that we can use. They're specifically stating that it's not going to be specific to Sony. It's going to be part of it's going to be a multi-platform endeavor from Bungie, and Bungie gets to keep that right of theirs by being a multi-platform studio. So it's less about IP and more about like the tech IP aspect of it. How can you take the stuff that Bungie has developed for their massive multiplayer game and graft that onto other experience that Sony may want to be developing in the future? And I think that's probably the key to the whole Bungie buyout and why they're so keen on putting over $1 billion into maintaining or retaining the talent that's already in the studio. They need that set of people to graft the technology that they've already created onto other experiences that Sony wants to create. So I would imagine that in the next 2 to 3 years, we're likely to hear Sony Studios production probably leveraging the technology and that Bungie's already created, and showing off some sort of massive multiplayer game that's using a lot of Bungie tech. So that's pretty cool. If there's more to talk about on that topic, like what you think about the acquisition, I still don't think it compares to the Activision acquisition. I mean, Activision acquisition was like a 60 billion plus deal. It's large. Like Microsoft's current MO is, and has been for a while, is IP acquisition. They need to get as many games as possible. Sony seems to be taking a very different approach, and has been historically, where they buy small publishers or small developers, primarily developers, to not necessarily just gain the IP, but specifically gaining a talented group of developers to work on new games. So Sony's been very adamant about creating new IPs for quite some time, and have been very successful at it. The IPs themselves, there's not much in the way of stuff that they've already created. So even with acquisitions like Bungie, it doesn't seem like the IP that people have been able to enjoy on two consoles, Xbox and PlayStation, is going to be changing anytime soon. It's likely we can expect new IP that uses the Bungie tech, as I said like 5 minutes ago. If you want more of our talk about why, about acquisitions, I'd check out the Xbox buying Activision video that we did 2 weeks ago. That really, I think, talks more about the consolidation of the industry and the issues with that. So there's same complaints there. It's just no need to rehash old details. Next bit of news. Well, actually, interjection. I'll give a slight break for people who are joining and listening to me now. We're Sonic Bloom. I usually have another person here joining me for the conversation. Sonic Bloom is a game tech company. We make game audio software, or game audio tools, to be more exact. But we have a keen interest in the game industry. We've been in it collectively for over 20 years. And so what we do every week is we tend to go over the biggest game news, but we do it from more of a game developer's perspective. Instead of speculating on, the latest rumors and everything else, we prefer to talk about the things that are more interesting to the industry. News that talks about maybe the trajectory of companies, strategies behind the major players like Microsoft and Sony, and what that might mean in the future. And we also dive into like other details that sort of give some insight into, how games are developed and the things that you can expect from like more of the internal mechanics of game development than from a fan perspective. So if you like that sort of thing, we're on every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. We stream both to Twitch and YouTube with the slug, Sonic Bloom TV. So that's youtube.com/Sonic Bloom TV or twitch.tv/Sonic Bloom TV every week. So if you like this sort of thing, check us out. I hope you follow us. We'll create content every week, as said, and periodically we'll also show news about some of the stuff we're working on, because we got some cool game audio tech that we're really looking to push further. We're wrapping up a big demo on that. We're going to make it available to people on a Discord server. So if you're into that sort of thing, check out our Discord. And I hope you enjoy the content. I'll take a brief intermission, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. And we're back. Yeah. So we just covered a bunch of details. So if you'd like to go back in the stream to check out my commentary on the Gran Turismo State of Play. The bigger news stories were Call of Duty details and what Microsoft plans to do with Call of Duty, WB Games, and their sort of update to their release schedule for Harry Potter, Gotham Knights, and Suicide Squad. We did a big segment on Sony buying Bungie. Not big, but like 5 minutes of talk. So if you want that sort of thing, rewind a bit. So after the intermission, we're going to cover the next set of news topics. So the next bit of news is specifically on NFTs. I think the most interesting thing that happened was Team 17, which is known for the Worms franchise, had announced they were going to have an NFT program. And it's not the most egregious of programs suggested so far. I think they kind of took a very Konami approach to it, which is basically creating art assets. In this case, it would be like 3D models of worms, artist representations of what the worms look like, that sort of thing, and then selling them online to make some extra cash. Konami's done this themselves with selling sprites and artwork from the Castlevania and Metal Gear games and selling those online. And it's managed to pull in millions of dollars for Konami. It looks like Team 17 was doing the same thing. This is one of the more innocuous approaches to NFTs. I don't find it particularly egregious if people want to buy weird NFTs of sprites and worm characters or whatever and spend thousands of dollars on it. Who am I to say that that's a problem? In that sort of led to this backlash. It's a general backlash in the game industry against NFTs because of the potential to how they can be abused in the future. This is kind of joining along with quite a few companies who have announced NFT plans. The bigger ones are Activision, Ubisoft, who have not backed down from the NFT plans. They're looking at NFTs as a way to augment content in games to make them more exclusive and to just find another way to pull money out of the game population or the gamer population in ways that can sometimes be unscrupulous. EA obviously had a big problem with this in the past with their use of loot boxes and ways to like sort of extract money from players. In general, it is not well received. In terms of loot boxes, EA's had to back down from that. Even EA announced some sort of approach to NFTs, and they've backpedaled on that, saying, look, we're not going to retread water that we know upsets fans. Activision, like I said, and Ubisoft are still going forward with theirs. And then a handful of other people have talked about NFTs, and it's kind of just stirred backlash broadly from the gamer population, at least the most vocal ones, that have caused a bunch of interesting reversals. Team 17 being the latest one, but even things like voice actors and other people within the industry who have looked at NFTs as a way to make some extra cash have quickly backpedaled on that promise. I'll just say it's kind of rightfully so. The game industry has not had a good history of finding new ways to make money from gamers and not abusing it. It's happened over and over again where once it's found that, hey, you can probably gain an extra, 5% in revenues from, selling, DLC, then suddenly game design comes around, not creating the best game, but how to sell DLC or how to hold back parts of the game and then chop off parts of it and sell it later outside of the $60, $70, $80 package that you already pay for a game. And this does have a lot of backlash. Maybe it would be different if you paid nothing for games or as part of the subscription service and then add-ons to games were, additional purchases, but that's not the current state of gaming right now. And any talk of extracting more money from gamers is met with pretty swift backlash from gamers themselves. So Team 17's backpedal is not surprising, but it's follows this kind of pattern of people just going, we announced something and now we're backing away from it. We don't want to make our fans angry. What I will say on the side of NFTs is that if not abused, there actually probably is a good use case for NFTs in games, specifically games with UGC, in which content generated in a game could then be tokenized and sold individually and possibly exchanged within games, so that people could create economies around games. Likewise, sort of what Team 17 had proposed, which is making, individual art that could be sold that had absolutely nothing to do with the game, but for people who are fans of Worms and Team 17's work could buy this stuff and own, tokenized piece of digital artwork that they could keep as their own. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that. I think there's something wrong with when you see a company like Activision who's not had a good track record of using new monetization methods for good. And a lot of times it's like things that should be free in a game suddenly are behind a paywall. NFTs could be used for the same thing and made it even more difficult. So this is where a lot of the pushback comes, but we'll see. I don't think NFTs are going to be going anywhere. I think actually it is a good way of creating tokenized digital content that can be exchanged in more safe ways than just, like eBaying an account or something like that. So I think we're yet to see the extent of what NFTs can do for games, and I do think the technology itself has a place in the game industry. It's just not in the ways that like people who are happy to take money are likely to use it. So I'm sure at some point a developer's going to come around, put it to good use, and people might turn around and how it could be used in games. So that's a wait and see, I guess. Next bit of news. FTC will be investigating Microsoft's purchase of Activision. Basically, there's two entities within the United States government that can sort of investigate these sort of deals that are announced. And I'll be clear, Microsoft's purchase of Activision is not complete, and it probably won't be complete for at least a year. Basically, the entire announcement they had is that Microsoft, or specifically Xbox Game Studios, had come to an agreement with Activision for a buyout deal. So that's the terms in which they would be buying out, at what price, and all that stuff was all agreed to and signed on paper. So if it passed regulatory muster, then the deal will go forward on the agreement that Microsoft and Activision came to. The key here is that it has to pass the regulatory bodies that oversee sort of these buyouts, and it is kind of political because basically the president in charge assigns the people to these positions that run the FTC or oversee them, and they can sometimes follow a political agenda, which may be look, we don't like the idea of monopolization or this conglomerating of large industries, so we want the FTC and the DOJ to take more interest in these types of cases and prosecute them more strongly than maybe a presidency that is more happy to turn a blind eye to it. So that means that the FTC is not going to pass it up to the DOJ. The FTC will investigate it, and they will look at whether or not Microsoft's terms in which they're going to be purchasing Activision is going to stand up to their legal scrutiny of whether or not it hurts competition within the games industry. There's probably an argument to be made one way or another, but that's not really for me to decide. What will be interesting is that the DOJ won't be looking at it, so it's not a matter of technical legality. So I don't think they feel like they have a strong case for monopolization or antitrust, because that would fall under the DOJ. Since the FTC looking at it, it's more likely a stronger investigation into whether or not a purchase isn't, not that it's not possible, but whether the terms need to be changed a bit in order for it to sort of not be as aggressive for the industry. And by that I mean they may ask Microsoft under the terms of the deal that games can't be exclusive, or what the terms and how Microsoft intends to leverage the Activision IP in the future. They can put in things in there where they're going to obligate Microsoft to divest in the company or divest parts of its own company in order to make the deal go through. Sometimes that squashes the deal. Sometimes it just, Microsoft will comply and make some changes to the deal that's put or make changes to the way the deal will happen, in which they may have to let go of some of the control that they want over the company. I don't think it will have a big impact on the deal itself. It's largely an IP acquisition, and I don't think that's going to fall under much scrutiny. It might be just how much the Activision sub studios have to be like specifically beholden to Microsoft. So we'll see. Basically, the most likely change would be, if there is going to be a change, is how Microsoft will be allowed to manage Activision as a company and brand. So last bit of news is Sony showing their Q3 results for it's technically 2021. So I think it's the fiscal year going from like October to November, December timeframe. It's kind of dry information because it's really like how well Sony did. The most interesting part, at least concerning the game industry, is their PlayStation Studios group and how well that performed for Sony as a company. The basic details are $24.9 billion in gross revenue for that quarter. So that's basically all the money that was pulled in by the Sony PlayStation brands, not including the costs or taxes. So it's $24.9 billion was just pulled in as raw cash, and then what they actually earned is different because they had expenses to consider. So their operating revenue, which is basically how much Sony made after accounting for operating losses, and that's to say like investments, hardware purchases, staff, all that sort of thing. That basically comes out to $2.6 billion in operating revenue. So that's roughly $22.3 billion in expenses that they had to account for, which sounds like a lot. I mean, it is, but don't forget that Sony's a hardware company, so a lot of their revenue is eaten through by just the sheer cost of acquiring components, manufacturing, storing, shipping, and getting it out to people. So $2.6 billion is what they earned in Q3. It is only down 21% year over year, which sounds also like a lot, like a 21% loss in its revenue from year over year is a big deal. But the thing that's important to keep in mind is this is a year in which they are dealing with the losses that they sort of incur from the startup of the production, the selling of brand new hardware and console, especially in one where we see shortages, and they've had to compensate for these shortages by probably operating at more of a loss than they normally would, and doing things like airdropping systems into countries where they need to supplies, because it's important for them to have supply there and not look like they're constantly short. So this is something that they've had to do and they've announced doing before. So it's expected that they take a big loss last year in trying to get PlayStation 5s out to customers, opposed to like a late gen PS4 era where the cost of manufacturing a PS4 is greatly reduced at that point in time, and every console they sell is like a larger than a 21% profit on it. So that is something to consider. It's expected that it was going to be a year-over-year loss, but they still reported $2.6 billion operating revenue, which is good. The most important aspects of this whole thing was that 68% of the revenue comes from services and downloads. So the lion's share of revenue that Sony generates is not from hardware. It's not from hard copy sales. It's from everything else. It's bizarre because I don't. You may think of, because Sony's like a hardware and software company, that they'd still be making the majority of their money from those areas. But what it really does break down to is that they of the 68%, or of the 100% of their operating revenue, 15% of that revenue came from services. That's PlayStation Network and PlayStation Now primarily. So 15% of that revenue comes from there. Not a huge number, but it's still not a small number by any means. Also, services probably have the highest gross margins on them, in which they're making profits. They typically require a lot less maintenance and support costs, and generally the money that's made there is much higher versus like a solid disc that you buy at retail, in which you're paying money for not just retail space but also the production of the disc itself. And so your revenues and your margins on a disc is less than if it's full digital. So it's not entirely unexpected. I think it's what's unexpected is that 68% of the revenue comes from all their digital endeavors combined. So full games, full purchases off of their online content or online stores accounted for 19%. So that's people going onto PlayStation Network or and making games from their the PlayStation Store of full games only. And the biggest surprise to me, at least, was that a whopping 32% of the revenues was add-on content and DLC. So what's surprising about this, I think, is not the services aspect of it, not really the full games. I think you've seen this sort of steady trend in the games industry where less games are being purchased as physical discs and more games are being purchased as digital content. And you kind of see this in their proportion of their full game revenues growing year over year. The add-on content and DLC being 32% of the revenues is the most shocking. And the reason why is because it means that games, especially persistent games, do make a bulk of their revenue and make a bulk of revenue for Sony as a whole through DLC and add-on content sales. And I don't think this really is like a case for, I don't know, like Spider-Man having like a DLC bonus content pack where you pay $15 and you get like an extra level or an extra mission set. This is more likely coin and virtual currency purchases, aesthetic purchases for games that are persistent. And then, in a broader context, it's just like anything that supports any of their other games and DLC and content types. We do not have a way of actually seeing this stuff broken down more specifically. I'd have to dive deep into their financial reports to see if they actually break it down, which they aren't really obligated to do. But I think this kind of shows the movement in the industry away from the one game and you're done, like we kind of see with the Sony studios. Like Horizon Forbidden West is generally a single player game. Once you're done with it, you can be done with it. The last Zero Dawn game had, I think, one content pack. That was the Frozen Wilds. But you can see that like those sort of games, they can't be the lion's share of the DLC because they come out so infrequently and they generally don't have a lot of content that's added on. This has to be primarily persistent games like Call of Duty, Warzone, Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, those bigger persistent games, not least of which is games like Fortnite and whatnot. So in the talks about them purchasing Bungie, you can see where their attention is being turned right now. Is like they can't just rely on these single player games, and Sony must be very eager to create a game that's a bit more persistent and has the opportunity to produce like an unending parade of DLC type content that can add on to a game that people are heavily invested into, like Destiny. So it's just an interesting data point. I think it tells a lot about how Sony's sort of seeing their future and what they want to do to expand their PlayStation studios and the offering that they have, not just in the sort of fun content that they can create, but how they can leverage that content and create additional revenue streams. Pardon me. Well, that's all the news for today. Thanks everybody for tuning in if you so chose. Hopefully you find this stuff interesting. Again, we air every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Follow us along. We usually cover the latest industry news, and usually we have like a big topic that we focus on. This week was kind of slow, so we only had like news tidbits. So thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week. Take care, everybody.